context setting slides from HTC, and then we'll hand over to the Office of Housing team. But I must say that this is where it all starts on the HTC end. I know it started earlier for many of you on the Seattle Housing Levy Renewal, and we have been in the building block stages. But now that this campaign is getting ready to take off, and I hope you are all with your sleeves rolled up to dig in and do the work ahead of us. But first, as we begin this Leonard launch, we would like to acknowledge where we are. We would like to open this Leonard launch by recognizing that we are all, wherever we are, on the unceded ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional home of all trades and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. And for non-Indigenous communities like ours, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of the land on which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous people's histories and working towards honoring and continuing to invite the truth. With that, I will begin by providing some context on the work around the Seattle Housing Levy Renewal in 2023. Earlier in March, some of you joined together as HTC members to testify at a finance committee after the Office of Housing had released investment reports on the housing levy performance. And we know that the 2016 housing levy currently is surpassing the goals that were set for it over the years. We're still a few ways to go in completing the timeline for the levy, and we are currently ahead of our goals. And I know all of you as HTC members are great partners in achieving those goals and exceeding them and taking us to where we are. We also know that the Office of Housing has been a great steward of the housing levy and making sure that we're making good investments of these dollars in supporting affordable housing. And while we have been doing this great work and producing the housing necessary and preserving the affordable housing necessary to meet the need, we also know that when this levy was passed in 2016, it was not like where we are today in 2022. And it will not be like it will be in 2023. We are in a completely different context where we have a greater than ever housing need in our community. And it is really incumbent upon us to be sure that this next iteration of the levy is getting us to a point where we have transformative investments that can deliver outcomes that change the systems in our communities. And the only way we can get there is if the size of that levy and the outcome of that levy gets us to a place where we change the conditions that continue to produce inequities in our communities. And this is going to be the work that calls on all of us to be all hands on deck. I will emphasize it's really going to take each of you as affordable housing providers, as people who are in the financing space, as folks who are providing services in our community, to come together and collectively have thought partnership of how we get to a point where the Seattle Housing Levy in 2023 is the biggest investment that we can set as a legacy for our city in upholding a 40-year tradition that we have held in place, committing to supporting affordable housing needs in our community. And I will talk a little bit about some of the building blocks work that we've done over the last few months and give you a sense of where we expect to be over the next few months as we move forward, so you can hear from the Office of Housing more extensively about the technical details of the levy program. Since the beginning of the year, we have been engaged in the process that the Office of Housing has been leading, doing stakeholder engagement with a levy leadership group that has provided feedback on existing programs, also talked about some envisioning of the work going into the future. HDC, through the policy advisory group, and many members who have been participating there, has been working on a roadmap of how we make sure that we're participating in the process that the Office of Housing has set up, but we're also preparing to take on the campaign work that HDC is responsible for as we renew the levy. I do believe that the last leadership group meeting that the Office of Housing hosted sometime last week was the last of the group meetings that they will have. And now it is really on all of you, HDC, to begin to convene in a campaign committee and get ready for the technical advisory committee that will be launched towards the end of the year by the Office of Housing, to be sure that we are providing input and really building strong advocacy muscle and support in the community for the housing levy. So we're looking to your experience as HDC members. We're looking to really be sure we're informing that process with all of the work, the good work you have been doing, and expanding what that could look like in addressing the exacerbated greater than ever housing needs that we currently have, and setting a more robust goal for ourselves. This is a levy that really gives us a leadership opportunity to be sure that we have the most robust housing levy. Some of you may have had me say this is a $1 billion levy opportunity. I think we can go even further than that. We're setting ourselves up for a more robust amount and size of the levy that can deliver on outcomes. Next slide, please. So the plan for today is really for you to hear from the Office of Housing team who are leading this levy renewal work on their end. And we do have Director Winkler Chin, who was confirmed and appointed last week, and we are excited to have her as the Office of Housing Director. And then alongside her is Kelly Larson and Stephanie Velasco, who have been great partners in thinking about this levy renewal and will be working with us as we go forward and continuing in that thought partnership. And they will lay out for you the current levy, past levies, give you context, but also talk to you about the renewal scope. What's the process? What are the timelines? And I will encourage you to prepare questions that really help us continue to provide effective input to this team and be partners with them as we get closer to them transmitting legislation that will be coming from the mayor's office. So it is an opportunity for you to engage directly with the Office of Housing. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions, raise concerns, share your insights, talk about the needs that we see in our community. We know that it's not just the housing need. We also know that construction costs have increased significantly. I think you will see in some of the slides that the Office of Housing will share that over the last 5 years, we're 24% up in terms of construction costs. And then the interest rates on the other end are in the north of 5% at this particular point, which really undermines the ability to create more affordable housing opportunities in our community. And we also know alongside that, it's not just the affordable housing sector, overall inflation rates are really high, and that continues to compound on the challenge of providing housing opportunities for people in our community. And with that, I will hand over to Director Winkler Chin, who will take it from here with her team to talk to you about the housing levy. So over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Patience. Hi, everybody. I literally did bring my lunch because it is a lunch and learn, and I get hungry. And Stephanie Velasco and Kelly Larson will keep laughing at me because that's the way we roll around here. And trying to move the camera down a little bit so you're not just seeing this part of my face, although most of the time we do. We've spent years looking at this part of our face. So this is our housing levy overview for you. Can you all see that slide?
Yeah, and let's see, I can get us set up here to present.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Okay.
So thanks, HGC, our strong partners in this work, for hosting this today. You want to go on to the next slide, Stephanie?
Mhm.
Okay, so the housing levy is foundational for us. We always say this. It's foundational because it's the most reliable and predictable funding source for producing affordable housing. It's something that way, because it's predictable, we can then do some planning about what it is that we want to fund and really think through what it is that we can do every year. And so for us, we say that it's very foundational because it's reliable and predictable. It's not necessarily the shiny, great new thing. It's predictable, but don't ever take it for granted, please. Next slide, please.
And I can take it from here if you want, Maiko. So this is information that you are all, I think everybody here in this Zoom meeting is very aware of. And as Patience said earlier, the need for affordable housing is greater than ever in our region. But just so that we can start with some numbers here, the first number that you see there, 29,000, is the number of people who experienced homelessness at some point in 2020. That's kind of our estimate for Seattle specifically. So adding to that, the number of people who experienced homelessness, the estimated shortage of rental units that are affordable and available to households that are making under 30% AMI. So you see there, that's a 26,000. So just if we're looking at this kind of lowest income level, 55,260 is the number of homes that we are kind of projecting that are needed for to address affordable housing needs at those lowest income levels. So again, not news to anyone here that we need tens of thousands of homes, and this is just talking about 0 to 30%. The need is great also at that 30 to 50, 60%, and so on. At those different levels. You can see there at the bottom of the slide, if we were to kind of cost that out, the McKinsey report estimates that we would need between $450 million and $1.1 billion every single year for the next 10 years to actually end the homelessness crisis in King County. So we're all working in this space and know that the need is huge. The work that needs to be done is big. And as Maiko said, the housing levy really is foundational in doing that work here in Seattle. So again, just another kind of set of data here to show you, not that this is news to anyone, but we all know that homelessness is increasing in our region, and that sort of dot graph on the right side of the screen comes from homelessness is a housing problem, which I know probably a lot of HDC folks are very familiar with at this point. But really just underscoring here, you can see Seattle at the bottom right of that kind of dot plot. We've grown, the city has grown tremendously over the past 10 years. But as the housing supply is not quite keeping up with that, we know that their housing costs have increased significantly. And again, homelessness is also increasing. So what we're going to talk about today is the 2016 Seattle Housing Levy. But before I launch into that, just a reminder, and this was something that Allison Eisinger at Skitch actually helped me to remember in terms of perspective. I've been here in Seattle for 10 years, working in affordable housing for the last 7 years, let's call it. So this is my first time that I will get to really participate in a housing levy and a housing levy renewal. And there may be other people on this call too, other HDC members who are new to the region. And so this may also be their first housing levy. So while we'll be talking about the 2016 Seattle Housing Levy, just a reminder that for the past 40 years, so our first housing bond measure was in 1981. And since then, we've also thanks to the voters of Seattle, have approved 5 other housing levies that have all exceeded their goals. So we're talking about 2016 today because it's the most recent one, but this really is a legacy, and it goes back to what Maiko was saying about it being foundational, that we are talking about this very predictable, reliable fund source, and it's predictable and reliable because the voters of Seattle have made it so. So just to lay that groundwork as we look at the 2016 housing levy. So here you can see these are the programs from the 2016 Seattle Housing Levy. So we have rental production and preservation, acquisition and preservation, and I'll talk a little bit more about these on the next slide. Operating and maintenance, home ownership and home repair, and homelessness prevention and housing stability services. So in terms of how funds are allocated to each of those programs, rental production and preservation is the largest kind of bucket, or has the largest allocation. Kelly can jump in and tell me exactly what percentage that is. But that goes to supporting the building or new construction of rental housing, as well as the preservation of existing rental housing that is either within the Office of Housing's portfolio, so which we had maybe previously funded from past levies, or other affordable housing throughout the city that is also in need of preservation and rehab. Operating and maintenance is also, again, to support that rental housing production and make sure that we are supporting you all in keeping your buildings running and actually safe and maintained for the life of those buildings. Home ownership there, you can see at 14.3 million in 2016. That program includes both home ownership development as well as our homeowner stabilization program. So the Office of Housing really actually kind of founded on this services to support low-income homeowners and make sure that they are able to stay in their homes and stay in them safely and comfortably. The next program down there you see is homelessness prevention and housing stability services. Previously, that has been a partnership with the Human Services Department here at the City of Seattle, who contracts out with nonprofit organizations to provide services through those programs. And then acquisition and preservation down there at the bottom. So this is kind of a unique program in that you can see there the funds allocated over 7 years are it's up to 30 million committed at any time. We're actually using funds from operating and maintenance program to fund these kind of shorter term loans that allow for a quick, nimble acquisition of properties that can then perhaps come in later to be kind of get more permanent financing through our office. But that's a way that we can do that creatively using the levy, using those levy dollars really multiple times. As Patience said at the very beginning, we are meeting and exceeding our goals for this levy and for past levies. So you can see here the orange bars actually represent what we have accomplished over the first 5 years of this 2016 housing levy. So this housing levy expires in 2023. So we have a couple years left to meet our goals, but we've already exceeded our goals in rental production and preservation. And then in operating and maintenance and homelessness prevention and housing stability services, we are on track to meet or exceed both of those goals. And you can see there at the very bottom, home ownership, we have already exceeded our goals there as well at the end of year 5 of the 2016 housing levy. And just to give you a sense of what that means in terms of meeting and exceeding those goals, you can see there in the far right column is the 5-year outcome, so what we've accomplished to date. And you can look at that compared to our 7-year goals. So just looking at rental housing production, for example, our goal for the 2016 levy from 2017 to 2023, so those 7 years, we gave ourselves the goal of producing 2,150 rent and income restricted homes. We have already produced or supported 2,700 homes and will continue to do so in the next couple years. So you can see those on down the line, we're really on track to meet and exceed all of the goals that we've set for ourselves. Okay, I am going to continue advancing slides here, but I'll pass off the mic to my colleague Kelly. If there are questions, HDC staff, I am not able to see the chat, so if there are any questions that people have or if hands are raised, feel free to pause us and we can stop and answer questions. We're happy to do that, and I know we have a lot of time for questions at the end, but for now I will pass it to Kelly to continue talking about development costs and leverage.
Yeah, for everyone on the call, great to see you. Feel free to jump in with questions as we go. It's not rude at all. It makes it more interesting for everybody, I think, for us to stop talking for a period of time. So please jump in. And Maiko's still chewing. So she's the rudest on the call of everybody. So please jump in and interrupt us. Yeah, we don't set goals for acquisition and preservation because that is not technically a program with goals. We do whatever we can to take advantage of opportunities in the market with the existing funding that we have sitting in the bank for the operating and maintenance program. But we've never established goals for the A&P program under the levy because it does change so significantly over time and really depends on opportunities that come up. It's more of a reactive program rather than a planning program. Thanks for the question, Jesse. Okay, so we'll go into a conversation around costs, describing the world that you all are living in and know really well. Costs are increasing significantly in order to build the buildings that we are building. Materials are really costly and increasingly so. A corollary is home values. We've also talked about adding a chart around rents because just generally costs are going up. We could probably also add milk and gas, all the things that we need to survive and continue building housing cost a lot more these days. This next slide shows the WISH-FIC TDC limits that many of you are very familiar with, but these have increased 24% over 5 years. And perhaps, don't necessarily reflect exactly the full cost that folks would be interested in or folks are seeing in their quotes and bids. But this is just significant change over time. Everything is costing more. This is a description of land costs that on specific.
Did we lose Kelly?
We did.
Okay. All right, we'll give her a chance to get back here. Can maybe just take a moment here. See if
Let me
there
run
are
down the
questions.
hall. Let me run down the hall and let her know that she's not talking to anybody.
I'm actually, Maiko, I'm right here. Hold on, I'll pop into, you can ad lib for a moment while I go check on her.
This is a scary spot if Maiko is having to ad lib to fill up time. I think if we're looking at these increasing costs, I don't think any of this should be surprising to any of you that land and acquisition costs are going up. And it looks like Kelly Larson is back on. Hurry up, get back on.
You would think that being in the city of Seattle building, you wouldn't have internet problems,
Oh,
but
hell no, hell no.
it just disappears. So sorry. Oh, goodness. Although I can't see Stephanie's screen right now. Ah, yes. Thanks for filling in there, Maiko. Yeah, so next slide. I love that this is being recorded. Thanks for the moral support there, Erica Malone. Really appreciate it. So the Office of Housing is always working really hard to maximize, and so are all of the providers and developers I know, just to maximize as many other fund sources as are possible to make these projects go forward. We are seeing more and more limitations in our funding environment, and this is this is a somewhat difficult concept to explain, but at this point in time, once the Office of Housing has invested around 80 to 100 million, it changes from year to year depending on other resources. At that point, we have usually tapped all the existing other public funding sources. So once we have achieved that level of investment at the Office of Housing, we are basically on our own with bank debt. So this is really important as we are starting to look at higher levy scenarios. We need to take that into account as we're trying to look at production goals and what the impacts are of additional investments. But this is we're going to show a couple of scenarios of what's happened in the past or this year. So over the last 5 years, this shows the primary funding sources that have come in to Office of Housing Investments. You can see the low-income housing tax credit is the orange bar. It's a huge funding source, very significant and very important resource for these projects. The gray bar is the Office of Housing. Blue is the combination. It's primarily state. There's also county in there a little bit. And you see 2021 is a bit of an extraordinary year, as will 2022 be with these federal one-time funds. So I put it as a dotted box because we're not necessarily counting on that going forward. But you can see from these very scientific arrows that I've added that as LIHTC decreases, the Office of Housing Investment is increasing. So we're needing to fill in to make projects go as we're losing leverage. We're losing other public sources in these projects. This is an example of 2 projects from this year, the last 2 years, that show some of the impacts, at least this particular scenario. Michael was reminding me that we've chosen to do it this way, and there are other possibilities in the universe. So this is just 2 scenarios of 2 separate projects. One that shows all the different public sources that you can leverage on a project. And these are real life examples. So you can see the yellow is the permanent bank debt. The gray is the Office of Housing Investment. The blue is state, county, other resources. The orange is the low-income housing tax credit. So on the left is one of those typically ideal public funder, leveraged, highly resourced project. And you can see at the top right that that leverage project is offering lower affordability targets. So half at 0 to 30 AMI and half at 30 to 50. And then this project on the right was not able to access low-income housing tax credits or other public funding sources. OH's investment is higher than on the leverage project. And then there's a huge swath of permanent debt. And that impacted the affordability levels on this project. So the affordability really shifted to higher income targeting, and there's no 0 to 30% units in this project. I'd be really interested to hear conversation around this slide with this group for sure. So chime in now or feel free to ask more or share your thoughts later.
Kelly, I do have a question, not on this slide, but on the slide around the 80 million to 100 about what that means in terms of loss of leverage overall.
Yeah, so Stephanie, maybe go to the leverage project slide. Yeah, this one. So I mean, this is an example basically. Once we have invested 80 to 100 million, so like we've created a bunch of projects on the left that are all leveraged, working with our public funding partners that also have money. So then we hit our 80 to 100 million dollar investment, and we have to move to this project on the right, where we are the only public funder, and the project relies on a significant amount of bank debt. Is there anything else?
Kelly, and I would say, if you're looking at the project on the right, if you wanted lower incomes at the building, we then would have to increase the OH investment. Does that make sense?
I think that's the message we need emphasized.
Right. So if you want lower incomes, you're not necessarily going to be able to have permanent debt. So if you were having a non-leveraged project with 30% AMI units, that chart, you might see the gray going up to, it would cost the same to build, right? So it'd be the same height of the bar, but maybe your OH investment, and this is me just throwing out numbers, maybe it's the OH investment is 30 million, and then the permanent debt drops down to 15 million. It's going to cost you roughly the same, but your distribution of bank loan and OH investment shift.
Right, and that's a huge difference in terms of the ratio that we talk about. So we often have this big message on the levy that we leverage 1 levy dollar for every 3 that we bring in. And that changes that picture significantly, right? So for that project, if we did what Maiko indicated, we'd be talking about putting in like $2 of levy for every one that we leveraged. And that's, I don't even know if we talk about bank debt as leverage. That's another question I have, but go ahead, Allison.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I just had a question or a point to make. The projects it looks like you're representing here are fairly significantly different because you have one, they're different sizes. So would be a little helpful just from the standpoint of what's the investment per sort of unit type. Obviously 0 to 30 needs quite a bit more investment because of the reduced ability to carry debt. But the leveraged or the non-leveraged project doesn't look as bad to me, because you're also talking about closer to, almost 200 or 150 units. I know it doesn't get your OH dollars quite as far, but if you're thinking of all soft debt or soft funding.
yeah, that's good. It is always hard to compare apples to apples with these projects. Everyone looks different. We could try and look at a project. I think we do have this one project with all the different financing scenarios to see what the differences are there, and that would be useful to add.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Allison. Did you want to say anything more, Patience, on the leverage?
No, nothing more.
Kelly, there are 2 questions in the chat. The first
If
one,
they're from Jesse Simpson, I don't want to hear them.
only one of them.
There are questions in the chat from.
Only one of them. Just kidding, Jesse.
But yeah,
Yes.
the first one that Jesse asked is, how much is OH estimating for Jumpstart and MHA funding per year?
So we are looking at we're basically looking backward in time on MHA and Jumpstart at this phase. I don't think the city is in a position to project very much at this stage because they are unpredictable. They're very uncertain. There's a lot of variability. There are a number of risks involved with projecting and relying on these fund sources. So in 21, I believe we had 75 million of MHA, and in 22, we have about 92 million of Jumpstart. So it's a significant amount of funding, at least this year. We're expecting for Jumpstart about 100 million in 2023. And I don't know that we're saying a number on MHA for 2023, just that in 2021, we had 75 million. Because it all depends on so many variables.
Honestly, I'll tell you, depending on who you talk to, we're either going to have like millions of Jumpstart or nothing, right? And so it's too new for us to determine what it is. And if you remember, some of the Jumpstart, I think in 2022, 2023 might go for general fund shortfalls first. And Kelly, I'm trying to open up the Jumpstart legislation documentation to figure out whether that's an ongoing thing or not.
The tapping into it for general fund shortages?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it is at this point, council can change things, I suppose, but until council changes, I think that is an opportunity for the city. And 62% of Jumpstart is dedicated for housing and uses, housing development and services at this stage. It's a percentage, it's not an allocated amount, so it's based on the revenues that come in. Donald's question on the non-leveraged column, what is the percentage of bank debt to overall cost? I mean, it's about 60%, I think. Other private, I mean, the other, yeah, I can't remember what it is. It's a combination of other private sources on that non-leveraged project. We can get back to you on that if you're interested.
So that helps with my second question too.
Great.
And then I see that, yeah, Katie.
Hi. So I'm assuming this is specifically in a 4% type project context, right? Are we planning on spelling out how decreasing leverage plays out in a 9% context? Does that just mean OH is splitting the bill for the whole thing as leverage declines in order to keep the building rate up?
Yeah, we haven't even looked at one of those scenarios. I think we're scared to see that scenario. Although
that's what I was wondering.
Do you want to go to the next slide, Stephanie? Because we have a 9% project example.
I would say, Katie, that is what that means, right? I mean, if the priority is built towards putting things that have no debt and there's no leverage,
right?
That is what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So this doesn't get at that question necessarily, but this shows an example of the increased costs and the impact just on, if we assume sort of status quo investment levels from all the different funders, like percentage wise, that even with assuming status quo other public investment, the Office of Housing contribution will need to increase significantly in the future years in order to make projects go.
Right. And the problem with leveraging, clarifying question, the issue with leveraging is as the cost of construction goes up, assuming none of the other sources increase in their capacity, either the number of projects will go down or OH will need to increase investment and keep the number of projects constant or go up even.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So the next slide shows what we are looking at for a scenario that assumes status quo investments, status quo production goals. Next slide. So the current levy and all of the prior levies are driven by our investments in rental production. It is the largest proportion of investments in the housing levy, about 70%. In 2016, we invested $201 million overall over the 7 years in rental production, and that was to achieve the building of 2,150 homes. With all of these increased costs, assuming the same bedroom split, assuming a 5% interest rate, and assuming a relatively conservative 30% leverage for the levy, we would require $315 million to achieve the same production goals for the 2023 levy. So in order to build 2,150 homes, we would need $315 million to support that level of production alone. Following that through logically, so for the OMS investments in 2016, it was $42 million. In 2023, we're proposing that a status quo investment is $73 million. The methodology there is that we have 2 levies that have O&M contracts that are expiring for the 1986 and the 1995 levies that impact a number of folks, and we'll get a little bit more into this. We need to cover those. And then we need to also add an inflation factor on the O&M that supports new projects. So basically multiplying 1.5 on the 42 million to support increased costs in operating and better supports for projects going forward. We worked with our folks on the homeownership team to develop this number for the homeownership investments that in order to hold status quo at the current production, we would need to increase that to 24 million. And then the top lines, the top bars are for the homelessness prevention and housing stability program. So overall, the levy is about 472 million for status quo.
And I'm going to pause there for a second because we've heard this from HDC, and also I think is important to just call out here. For the modeling purposes here, as we're talking about status quo, really to illustrate what the change in cost is and what those impacts are in terms of production and what we might be able to accomplish if we were to just do exactly repeat the same goals that we had from 2016. But just to remind you back to the beginning of this presentation when we were talking about housing need and the increase in that need, the increase in homelessness that we've seen across our region, I think it is pretty clear, and we've heard from HDC staff, from HDC advocates, and others. We know that status quo is not enough. This is really kind of illustrating here just how much more expensive it is to do the work that to support the work that you all are doing, and the work that we continue to do in collaboration. So just wanted to leave that with you as we move on to kind of think about what other things are going on in the funding environment and the policy environment that Kelly's going to cover here next. Is yeah, just making it clear. I think we know that status quo is not enough at this point. Looking ahead to 2023, it's very different from 2016, as Patience said, and we know we need to do a lot more.
Responding to Patience's question around whether this model uses the new WSFIC TDC limits. So we started it with the 2022 limits, and then we added a factor of increase kind of based on what we've seen, I think. And that's incorporated into this model, the increasing costs every year.
That's really helpful, Kelly. My internet is on and off. Can you hear me?
Me too. Mine too. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. That's really helpful. I think it's important though, as you go through this slide and talk about the change in cost and the status quo, to show that this is not an option of a renewal that we have as a city. I do know that socializing a number that's benign can present a way that undermines our ability to get to a bolder option of a levy. So I do appreciate that you are emphasizing that it's really just factoring in inflation. It may be helpful to reflect both need and the fact that this is not an option that we have as a city for renewing the levy.
Yep, thanks, Patience. I think we will, unless there are other questions, continue on.
Loving the dialogue. Keep the questions rolling. So there are a lot of other things happening in the world right now. We have King County Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services levy up for renewal in 2023, a potential other King County levy, and potentially another King County levy. There's city and county council elections, the big year, it's a big slate of elections for 2023. There is a potential 2022 social housing ballot measure, or even possibly 2023. So that's in the environment. We will know more soon. And then just, reckoning with all the other pressures on property taxes overall, increased home assessments, all of that. At the Office of Housing, we are very involved in tracking and leading the MFTE renewal that's happening next year. We're working with our partners at OPCD on the comprehensive plan. And then you all have seen the new HUD income limits and how that impacts all of our work, and I'm sure will continue to rise. So this is a section just to focus a bit on the OMS piece. It's a very complicated part of the levy because it goes on forever. There is some, as much as rental production is expensive, it is a one-time, to some extent, a one-time investment. Operating, maintenance, and services go on for so long, and it's the, real, that's where all the real housing is happening on an ongoing basis. So this is an important part of the levy. But we do have, from the 1986 and 95 levies, we have 25 buildings that are facing expiring contracts affecting 333 homes. We have decreased availability of other resources to come in and cover these costs and to cover costs on new projects. So we're looking to the 2023 levy to help address these expiring levy O&M needs and ongoing new production, as well as our workforce issues that you all are facing. This next slide has a couple of pictures of two projects that are impacted by the expiring 86 and 95 levies. fairly well-known, 1811. These are the organizations that are impacted by the 86 and 95 expiring O&M contracts. So a lot of our major providers are impacted. And this is an example of a permanent supportive housing operating maintenance and supportive services budget. So on the left side is the operating cost expense. On the right side is the revenue. You're putting about 15 to 20 FTEs into a permanent supportive housing project to make it run just on site for that project, not counting any of the offsite management or maintenance or leadership or overhead. So a 100-unit project, we anticipate costing around $2.5 million. If we bring in on the revenue side 100% of those homes covered by SHA vouchers, we still have a gap of about $1 million to fully fund that project. There's a number of resources that we typically tap into to cover our supportive housing projects: King County, state, federal, McKinney or COC dollars, the vouchers from the Seattle Housing Authority, and now more and more Seattle is in this funding picture with our OMS. And within this category of operating maintenance and supportive services, there are significant desires from providers to support the staff who are on the front lines in these projects and provide the continuity of care to residents to make these buildings home for people. There are really serious hiring and retention challenges for providers with staff. There have been suppressed wages for too long. Some of the working conditions can be very challenging. And there's capacity limitations for all these organizations doing this work. Even very large organizations that you think are very firm and strong are actually not as strong as you would think. Everybody is really, everyone's impacted by the pandemic, of course. But really large organizations are facing this just as well as really new organizations. I was just talking to a provider this week about, being really excited about the growth they have ahead of them, but also just so much worry and stress about hiring to be able to staff those projects and how they're going to do that. And I know that that's impacting a lot of organizations right now. So we're interested in looking at investments to support the workforce within this OMS category.
Okay, so I know there may be questions there. I'm going to cover one slide here and then actually maybe take our slides down and pause and collect questions. But just sort of taking into account all of this analysis that the Office of Housing is doing on the data side and on this number crunching side, also want to emphasize that we're also doing a lot of outreach to our stakeholders. And as Patience mentioned earlier, that stakeholder engagement actually started back in January. So for the past 6 months, we've been doing some intensive engagement with the Levy Leadership Group that Patience mentioned earlier, as well as a few focus groups. And I know there's folks here who have participated in some of those different focus groups. So one of those is our homeownership focus group. So looking at both homeownership development, as well as other ways that we are able to support low-income home buyers, as well as stabilizing existing low-income homeowners. We have a focus group specifically looking at equity issues. So when we talk about equity, we're talking about organizations that are really rooted in communities of color, that are BIPOC led, that are interested or have been interested in and are pursuing affordable housing development, perhaps for the first time or second time, that are really newer to affordable housing development, and how can we support them and lower barriers to them participating in this sector. As well as looking at the other existing programs that we have within the levy. How can we do better around achieving our racial equity outcomes in the homeownership space, in the rental housing space? And then finally, the last focus group that we have been meeting or convening is the rental housing capital and OMS. So that is the group that's really tackling a lot of the information that you heard here from Kelly, looking at the hard issues around what it takes to really not just construct a building, but keep it maintained and have that building run successfully for the people that it is serving for many decades. So those are the groups that we've been convening. We also have the Housing Levy Oversight Committee that has that's an ongoing standing committee that meets every quarter or so. That also has provides us feedback as the Office of Housing on the housing levy, particularly the 2016 levy, as we've been meeting and exceeding our goals. And then the Technical Advisory Committee, which will be convening starting, we believe, in August through this fall, which will really take a deep dive into looking at the housing levy, an early kind of proposal about what that housing levy might look like in terms of the size of the levy and the programs. And that group will begin convening in the next couple months. So in terms of the stakeholders, those are the folks that we've been engaging, the people who are really subject matter experts. So that includes you all here. And then also this summer, which really just started, is our broader community engagement. So making sure that we are, as we're reaching out to the general public, making sure that they're aware of what outcomes have come from the 2016 housing levy and our historic housing levies, really connecting the dots between the affordable housing that is out there and the fact that it is publicly subsidized and supported. I actually just had a call in my role as the communications manager here, just had a call yesterday from a group of folks who live in an assisted living community up on First Hill, and they're doing a walking tour of the neighborhood of the different affordable housing developments in the area. So including the Bellwether in Plymouth, Rise on Madison, and some other ones in the neighborhood. And they were just so struck by how many of the buildings that they really pass every single day are both supported by whether it's the housing levy or other local public funds, but just how many of their neighbors actually are having an opportunity to live in this neighborhood who may be earning lower incomes, and so are able to live there and afford to live there because of publicly supported affordable housing. So I think hoping to continue to make those connections for people, and we'll be leaning on you all, HDC, to help us tell those stories. And then as we go into the beginning of 2023, so that's the last arrow down there, the Office of Housing will be working to prepare a proposal to the Mayor's Office for them to submit a housing levy renewal legislation to Council early in 2023. And then if passed through Council, then Council would submit that to King County elections to include on one of the ballots in 2023. So I'm going to pause there. We have a few other slides here that we could share about what we've heard from our stakeholders so far. Many of those include what we've heard from several of you on the call. But I wanted to pause there just to see kind of what we're hearing from you all in this group. I think this is every opportunity that we get to share about the housing levy and about this renewal process is also an opportunity to hear from you all. One is what we're saying aligning with what you are really experiencing out there. Does this resonate with you as feeling like it's reflective of what you all are seeing in your day-to-day? And then also as we're thinking and putting together these kind of programs and uses for the future levy, are there things that we are missing? Are there things that we haven't kind of mentioned in the programs that we've described here? Are there things that we should be thinking about that we haven't already mentioned?
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I do see there's someone who wants to chime in, and thank you, Kelly and Michael, for your presentation. Please go ahead and comment.
Stephanie and Patience, part of what I missed, and I may have not been paying attention, was more on home ownership and how do we increase that percentage of funding towards home ownership, not taking away from rental. but just increasing the size of the pie so home ownership gets a greater piece of the pie. I also just wrote down a note here about reparations. And I'm going to dive into a little bit of the precedent from the city of Evanston, Illinois on reparations and localized reparations. And how can home ownership benefit from a just repair, reparations for redlining? Now we know redlining was a federal offense, not so much local, but I think the conversation needs to be opened up for that when we're talking about housing funding and levies.
Yeah. Very well said, Donald.
Yeah, thank you for that. I actually maybe as a way just to respond to that first about home ownership, Donald put up here, and I see Denise has her hand up as well. I might just put up on screen here a little bit of what we heard. You'll get a kind of taste of what we were hearing in the home ownership focus group. But also would love to hear from Denise too. So I'll just put this up here. There's 2 slides. I'll flip through to the next one in a moment. But here's what we've been hearing so far, and I think your comments, Donald, are definitely reflective of what we've been hearing so far in that group too. Denise, did you want to jump in?
I just wanted to add emphasis and support for what Donald just said, that I think there is a really appropriate, logical, meaningful connection between reparations and home ownership. So it would be great to see the city taking a lead in making that happen here locally.
And I'm saying being specific too for home ownership. So we narrow the focus. We tie it to damage and harm that's been done in the past, and it's a justifiable repair.
Thank you, Donald. I think we've had some really great conversations with our homeownership stakeholders so far, and we are going to continue that work as we continue on this year. We've definitely heard that, and at the Office of Housing, I think we are supportive of that. We're looking at ways that we can, and Erica's always pushing us, and we're trying to figure out how we do as much as we possibly can within the legal constraints of the city of Seattle. But we're pushing and pushing, especially Erica's been a great leader on that, to try and have some tough conversations and tap all the resources that we possibly can to explore how we can do things differently and really talk about it in that reparative way. We certainly often talk about the housing discrimination that has occurred, the harm that has been done in the past, and then it's getting to the point of being able to prioritize funding and sort of dedicate funding is where things get challenging with fair housing laws. So we're trying to figure out how we navigate that at the office and in our policies and procedures. But we appreciate your advocacy ongoing, and we'll do everything we can to continue working with you on that.
And I will say on the home ownership side of things, so I mentioned, or the technical advisory committee was mentioned. We have actually a special kind of ongoing focus group, I will say, or working group that will continue to work through issues specifically related to home ownership as kind of in parallel to that technical advisory committee process. And so Donald and others who are on the call here who are specifically interested in home ownership, I believe that at least part of that will be facilitated through the existing HDC home ownership affinity group to some degree. So if you're connected in with that group, you'll start seeing housing levy discussions kind of tied into those ongoing meetings. And of course, please continue to send comments to Kelly, Maiko, and myself. This is really, really helpful.
I'll just reiterate the point on homeownership as really being an opportunity for the city to advance equity goals. And to Donald's point, it's one way to repair past harms. I'd be curious to talk offline, Kelly and Stephanie, on how we even coordinate with the comprehensive plan work to tie some of that work to the comprehensive plan update while committing more investments to support homeownership opportunities within the bounds of what's possible. I do have a question on the crunching of numbers and where we are in terms of potential scenarios and sizes of a levy. I know it's very preliminary. This may not be the good time to talk about levy size, but you could speak high level just to some of what you anticipate as potential opportunities there in terms of a robust transformative investment in the levy.
Sure. So we are talking about the need, which is significant, and then we are looking at the capacity of our system, both at the Office of Housing and in the provider world, both nonprofits and for-profits, to be able to utilize funding to a significant level to approach meeting the need as much as we can. We're doing everything we can to look at all of what we know. Primarily Lori Olson's team is helping to lead this analysis. I'm working with them closely on this, but they're the experts on what it looks like right now and what it possibly could look like. So, examining the leverage environment, thinking through production goals and our provider community and the capacity of all these agencies to continue building. That is all part of the equation as we go forward, but we definitely want to maximize for our proposal. We want to maximize within the scope of what is possible, what we are putting forward to the mayor's office. And, we're certainly hearing from the provider community interest in going really big, going to $1 billion, potentially going really, really big. And, at least as a starting point, we're seeing as what we can do at the Office of Housing with all of the assumptions that we're making, how far we can go. And then it moves to a different phase. We can put forward the numbers that we have and do all the analysis, and then it will move to a different phase outside of our office for determining where that actually lands. So we are doing that as much as we can. Certainly every time we hear input from the provider community and advocates, that helps to support the cause of the work that we're doing. And so we can always say, we've heard from numerous stakeholders, and it's been a lot now, that this is what we need to be doing. There's confidence in the provider community that they can use this funding and build these homes. So we need, keep hearing that from you all, that we can keep going forward and doing this work. And we'll do everything we can to bump up our scenarios as high as possible. We're really in early stages right now of putting together sizing proposals, sort of like overall, what could the levy do? And again, it's driven by rental. That could change, but it probably won't change a ton, but that could change. That drives the goals, and it drives the amount of the levy that has so far. And we'll be developing a few scenario options. We'll be developing a few programmatic options within those scenarios. And then those will be vetted by the mayor's office, or they currently are being vetted, and we're going to keep on going as we have more information. So right now we have sort of a starting point for overall size. We're doing more analysis to be able to get to what does this amount of money produce in terms of the number of homes. What are the different trade-offs? What are the different levers you can pull to make things look different? And then what are the programs that we're putting forward? And that will then be approved by the mayor's office to move to the technical advisory committee. And the technical advisory committee will be charged with reviewing our initial proposal at sizing the levy and assigning investments to programmatic areas. And that will change over the course of several meetings of the technical advisory committee. We will absolutely hear feedback and do everything we can to make adjustments based on what we hear from advocates. And then the final proposal will go to the mayor's office to send over to council.
That's really helpful, Kelly. in response to the earlier question that Stephanie posed on what's missing and going back to think about sizing, I would encourage emphasis on housing need consistently beyond just the beginning of the conversation. But as you get closer to sizing, let's talk about where the need is today. And then as you're thinking of the sizing piece, tie the sizing to the outcome of what we could see that levy actually address as portions of the need, because we know not one tool will address all of the exacerbated needs that we have. And we have to set ourselves up for resonance with voters in terms of being clear. No matter how bold this tool is, it will cover a portion of the need, and we need to be bolder, but that does not mean that it will address all of the challenges that we currently are dealing with. And then the last point that I will emphasize is the 2016 levy numbers and what they look like today, keeping them separate from the sizing of what a future levy proposal could look like, will go a long way in building support, both from elected officials to the community as well, in terms of thinking of what that levy cents could be per thousand value and what the overall sizes would look like, without including what straight up levy renewal could look like, because that's not an option we have in this current scenario.
Yeah, we're going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what it looks like when we actually start looking at some of the analysis. We absolutely need to talk about outcomes, and it's going to be interesting to see because we are going to have to make assumptions at the Office of Housing around that leverage factor, and things may change significantly. We will be wanting to frame this in terms of outcomes. We will work on that with you all too. I think it's going to be huge to get this analysis underway. So it's in progress, and that'll be a really interesting conversation next. Thanks, Patience. I see there is one chat question around, are we going to go up to 80% AMI? So the homeownership investments currently go up to 80% AMI. We are not considering going up to 80% AMI on any of the other investment categories. That would require significant, I don't know, we'd have to really think about that. There's so much need at the 0 to 30 level and the 30 to 60 level at this stage. But you know, the point that Connor was making is that it really changes the way you can fund a project. And that's true. So it'll be interesting to see what these, again, what these scenarios look like, because we will be putting in AMIs and projecting that to some extent in these scenarios. So we'll have to see what we can do with our current sizing projections. I don't know the answer to Donald's question. We could ask our lawyers.
Yeah, bad grammar and even worse legal language. But the question basically is that,
he said precedent.
Yeah, I use precedent anyway, but legal action is another legal term. But that redlining was in opposition to the U.S. Constitution. So it was an illegal action.
Mm-hmm. And local, you know, municipalities are implicated in terms of all of the zoning that was done and continues to be managed by the local municipalities. So it's built in at every level of government and has been perpetuated for decades and decades and generations.
Kelly, if I can put you on the spot and ask you to talk a little bit more about the OMS needs and what you've had so far and some of the cliff in terms of funding there for some projects that we're seeing.
Yeah, so we still have more work to be done on the cliffs. We have existing contracts. You know, the status quo scenario that we showed earlier really just, it holds status quo. It's those are small little contracts for the most part. A lot of those housing projects are continuing on and need resources to keep doing what they're doing, just baseline. And If we were talking about doing more support for some of those projects or increasing workforce supports, it would require additional investment. You know, it's a very serious situation for our providers who are providing permanent supportive housing in this community. It's very serious. It's a very difficult environment. The crisis response system for folks with serious behavioral health challenges is incredibly fractured and not working well. Oftentimes, the crisis response system relies on law enforcement intervention. So, for example, if someone's having an acute crisis, they have imminent threat to self or others. Someone will call the designated crisis response team, which is run by King County. You'll be added to a list that is incredibly long. When you actually make it up to the top of that list, a designated crisis responder requires SPD or Seattle Fire Department to be on site and present to assist in the detainment of that individual. They also have to agree to open their door, which they often do not, or you have to cleverly find a way to, intercede when they're in the hallway or out on the street. It's really, really challenging. And, the workers who are making the lowest wages are on the front lines of these housing projects and really are the first responders for the most part to these situations where we're not getting as much support as we need. So there's a lot of challenge there. And then, going further upstream from that, not enough outpatient mental health services. We don't have enough outpatient substance use services. All of the other supports that help to bring people back to stability are really, really constrained. So this plays out a lot in permanent supportive housing because they are housing very significant behavioral health conditions, and it's really hard to retain and recruit employees. And then, we're certainly seeing some of these cases as well in regular affordable housing and market rate housing to a lesser extent, but this is happening in all housing types, right? Where folks are hitting a crisis, and particularly with the pandemic, all the isolation and everything that everyone has been facing. It's a challenging time and there's just not enough supports. So we're looking at what the Office of Housing can do. It's one funding source. We don't really know what that looks like at this stage, but we're continuing conversations with our stakeholders, thinking internally what that might be, how we can, play a role in supporting this very, very serious need in our community.
Thank you, Kelly. It really mirrors what we are hearing from a lot of providers as an area of need, and we'll be advocating for support there. Any other questions for the Office of Housing team? This is your opportunity.
I also have, maybe as people are thinking about questions, one quick update and maybe just a little bit of a plug here. If you enjoyed spending your lunchtime with the Office of Housing this
and we know you did.
You can do it again next month. I believe the date is July 20th for another Learn It lunch with the Office of Housing. So that'll be Jessica Gomez giving a presentation about the Notice of Intent to Sell program. So one, if you want to learn more about that program, please join next month on July 20th. And if you, even before that Lunch and Learn, if you want to be on the list of organizations that actually receives notifications of properties that are going up for sale through the Notice of Intent to Sell program, please email Jessica, and I can put her email in the chat, jessica.gomez@seattle.gov. So that is the best way to get on that list so that you can find out about properties that are going up for sale, and come back on July 20th to learn more. And it sounds like from Lauren, registration will be in the Member Digest email tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephanie. You also have another opportunity to dive in on the housing levy on July 13th. where we have a forum with the elected officials, the mayor and city council, and I'm posting the event here for you to talk about these similar issues, but with elected officials, and begin to build strong support for the levy renewal. So we hope you can join us then and continue this advocacy. I will close, Stephanie, by thanking you and your team for all your work, Kelly for all your work, putting together the levy renewal alongside Michael. But I also thank you for making it real in terms of the reality of what those projects look like. You mentioned the Rise earlier from Bellwether. I believe the Rise is one of the first high-rise developments that we've had in a very long time, 200 feet tall, 17 stories tall of affordable housing. And that's amazing that the levy continues to invest in these kind of projects and make affordable housing possible for people, even though the need continues to be exacerbated. With that, we are ready to work with all of you to renew the levy and ensure robust and transformative investments in the 2023 levy. So go HTC, thank you.